so many paths you can take, in the world of architecture and in art too. So if you're a painter, it's like, and this is something you have to say, this is what gets me up, and I'm gonna live and breathe this.
And we're live today with Terry Welker. Welcome, Terry.
Hi, nice to be here.
I met Terry, came across some of his work, and what first grabbed me was on Facebook. I saw your face. I did a session with another Dayton local artist. I've done a couple of Dayton artists, and I think you were friends with them, Lori Daughtery.
Yep.
Daughtery. And a Sydney King.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a small world in Dayton. I mean, although we have a plethora of artists, so many now that I've not even met, and I go like, how do I not know those people?
Right. So I remember seeing this, and I saw that you were a kinetic artist,
Yes.
and I saw a sculpture. It was really fascinating, and I thought, this is the guy. I got to track this guy down. He's going to be an interesting guest. Because, Terry, I'll share a little something with you. Most of my listeners know this. My essence, I'm an artist. My passion has been fitness as a communicator. And what do we not only, we communicate in many ways as artists and all kinds of levels. And at least I believe that's hopefully I'm able to achieve some of that kind of success in terms of inspiration. And Imagine Fitting and podcast is all about inspiring others.
Well, I can see art in that way. I don't look at art as making things or per se, but it's more about how you do things. It's a manner of being.
Methodology of creation,
method, of course, but it's more about how you be. It's like, so for me as an artist, it's something I can't not do. It's just a part of the fabric of my life.
Exactly. And it's funny you say that, because sometimes I have trouble, I don't know, explaining myself, but I'll hear different various quotes. And I think I wrote something to my brothers the other day, and I mentioned something about sometimes I have a hard time expressing myself correctly in every situation. But there's so much, and I feel like I feel like I see so much. I see and feel like above and beyond. And it's almost like my brain is trying to constantly try to catch up, like, I get these sensations. And you try to translate that, and you talk to an average person that's not,
Sharing is the hard part sometimes. It's, whenever it's, you're welling up with inspiration, it's like, and it's got to have an outlet somewhere. But making it translatable for others is sometimes the bigger challenge. Doesn't diminish its value. It just means that it's difficult to share at times.
Right. And I go back to in my art from a graphic sense, and I kind of keep it simple, stupid. I love color. I love simplicity. I love boldness. And I definitely have played around with various mediums. So as an artist, I started drawing and writing at a very early age. My father was, as I shared with you earlier, I've understood that he's a very creative guy, very great communicator, and ultimately he was a writer. And it took me a while to kind of finally zero in on that, and the fact that I write, I draw, I paint, I do sculpture. The only sculptures I've done are sand sculptures. I do huge sand sculptures on the beach. And all my travels. And then I always wanted to be in music, but never got there. But ever since I turned 50, after I lost my sister at an early age, I finally said, that's it. So at 50, I started playing the drums. I had started singing in 2000 after my father died.
I think 50 is that magic age when, for most people, I encourage my own friends and family who are younger to say, don't wait till you're 50, but you know what? Maybe it just has to be that way. And so at 50, you sort of decide, all right, my days are numbered at a certain extent, not to be morbid about it, but it's like you decide.
More behind you than in front of you?
Well, yeah, it's like, all right, the things you used to worry about don't matter anymore. and the things that do matter, it's like, okay, I'm going to do something about that. So it's a courageous moment.
Right.
Crossing
Almost a
the,
corrective awareness.
oh, absolutely, yeah, sure,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So I
So
totally get it.
So Terry, again, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. It's going to be a great. I can just tell it's going to be a great session. And I usually start on Imagine Fitting In. This is all about mentors, healthy lives, and community. And I usually start on, where were you born? Where do you call home today? And what what mom and dad do? What was childhood upbringing like?
Well, that's a fascinating moment. I may have mentioned to you in passing. I was an Air Force brat growing up, and my mom and dad got married when my mother was quite young. And it was interesting, little prehistory that I didn't discover until I was a teenager about them. That my father was in the Korean War, and he was. I was born at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which is just across the border from Clarksville, Tennessee, where my father's family was. And when my father was deployed, and so I was born on an army base. And but preceding that time, my mom and dad fell in love when my father was stationed out west in Washington State at Fort Larson, and my mom lived in the nearby town of Soap Lake, and my dad and his friend were double dating my mom and her sister, and they ended up in a double wedding.
Oh, cool.
Prior to that, they had some anxious moment because I remember my father finding out that my father, well, he was at Fort Larson, as a young private and was being shipped. They had a thing called Operation Christmas, sent all the soldiers home for Christmas. And my father at that point in time had just gotten his first stripe, and so that meant he had a driving privilege on the base. And for this Operation Santa Claus to send him home for Christmas, he was picking up his buddies, and a couple of them were notoriously late. And so I've learned to accept lateness as a blessing at times, because when he gets there, they're on a Globemaster, C-141 Globemaster, at that time the largest transport plane in the U.S. Military, and they load all these soldiers on there, and they're late getting in there, and the loadmaster instructs my father to sit all the way in the back in the swept tail section. And the Globemaster had a nickname called Old Shaky, it's just the design of it. And something went wrong, terribly wrong on liftoff, looking at ancient reports, maybe the flaps weren't unhooked or something bad. They, who knows for sure what it was, but a couple miles off the end of the runway, this thing couldn't get enough lift and crashed in the desert. Oh. And my father was one of a handful of men that survived. Over 100 men died.
Whoa.
Because he was in that tail section, because his friends were late. And so when the plane does a belly flop crash full of fuel,
oh my gosh,
and you can imagine the horror, but the tail section itself breaks off, falls sideways. My father's unconscious, able to cut himself out eventually, and he and the handful of people were there, did the best they could to save whoever.
Oh my goodness!
So it was a horrific moment that was obviously traumatic, that I never learned about my father until later, and I wonder how much it shaped him. But nevertheless, it didn't stop the love of my mother and father. I found some letters recently from my mom. My father wasn't good at writing letters, and he admitted it, but my mom wrote letters to him all the time, called him Red. That was his nickname because he had red hair. And she was Jenny, Virginia. And so that was the beginning of that. And they were married their entire lives together. And we, like I say, being an Air Force brat, I lived all over the United States. And
did you have siblings?
Oh, siblings, yeah. I had two younger brothers and a younger sister. My youngest brother is no longer living, passed away in a motorcycle accident about 25 years ago. And my sister, Diane, she's well known in town. She's the proprietor of the Century Bar downtown. That's the famous bourbon house in downtown Dayton.
Oh, really?
Jefferson. Yeah, that's my little sister, Diane,
and
who I'm quite proud of.
Okay.
And my brother is a retired Army, and he's he worked for he was one of the high security geeks in the Army and got out worked for Reynolds and Reynolds until he retired.
Okay, okay. And your sister at the Bourbon,
At the Century,
Century, what's her name again?
Diane.
Diane?
Yeah.
Listen, this is a Dayton-based podcast. if she's a good, she'd
Joe
love to
Head
share
are
a story.
Well, Joe Head's the famous figurehead there that knows is that he's a bourbon royalty as a Kentucky colonel and
Really?
does all their leadership. That they have over 600 whiskeys. Anything you want to know about whiskey, and by the way, it's one of those real places with no televisions or ferns.
There you go.
It's a place to go. Put your technology down and
Yes.
meet and
Nice.
connect with people, just like we're connecting right here.
Right, beautiful. That sounds like a wonderful place. I have to go check it out. I mean,
Right.
it's wonderful. I mean, that
Right.
is so needs to be like brought up to the surface and right. That's
Well,
great.
Cities are made up of little what I call vest pocket utopias, and that's certainly one of them.
I bet. I'd never heard of the place. So when like when you were a kid, like some of your earliest memories, did you realize, do you have any visions of what you were like wanting to be at an early age, or that come later on like your passions and stuff?
The only connection I can make to my own creative outlets were that I knew it was just something I did as a kid. I mean, it's the only way my mom could get me to shut up and sit still in church was to give me something to draw on. So that was part of my habit. It's like that's what kept me sane, and all through. I would say it took me a long time to figure this out. Maybe turning 50 is like, okay, what is the connection here? And so that's when I figured out if my life is analogous to a tapestry, that the strongest threads are really in the art world.
Okay.
As an architect, sculptor, everything that I think about. I mean, I can't make a sandwich without thinking on it creatively.
how you're putting it together and how things are going to fit.
It's just one of those things in my head that it's like, all right, that's why I say to people, it's like, it's not a thing. It's a state of mind.
Yeah,
So,
I can identify with that tremendously as an artist. I mean,
Yeah.
I believe, and I've said this multiple times, and I truly believe it, that the artists are modern day shamans. We see things, we feel things, we see. I always laugh because I remember watching the cowboy and Indian movies, right? When they didn't show any blood, they didn't show anybody getting
Sure.
just an arrow and whatever. And I used to love, for whatever, I just wanted to be a young Indian buck on a horse with no saddle. I had no intention of wanting to be a cowboy, and I thought the Indian girls were beautiful. And anyway, that being said, there's that classic Indian medicine man who they would show running around like he's a psycho.
Right.
And seeing visions and but they would be all of a sudden he'd calm down. You'd see him all crazy. He'd
Sure.
calm down, and then the chief or the head
Sure.
would all like, "What do you have to say?"
Right.
And they would just give a glimpse, and then he would just run off crazy and wild.
Well,
and it's almost like an analogy to where I feel
Yeah.
sometimes my life takes me, and
boy. Some weird things that American culture brought on there, but it is actually a real thing in those cultures. I read, years ago reading Carl Castaneda, and the Journey to Ixtlan and all those the series of books. It's like, maybe they used a little peyote, but it was a real world view for them. It's a way to organize it. So, but I think in every culture, every society, I think just the fabric of human life is that we all have those threads, and I think just a matter of figuring out what that thread is. For some people, it might be music. For some people, it might be math. For some people, it's language. Like my good friend, Sierra Leone, the poet, and so I think that's just a matter of finding out
your vehicle.
What's your vehicle, and because I think that's what feeds your soul, and that's if I could give advice to anybody that's because they'll look at artists and go like, oh wow, I so admire that. It's like, well, that's good to do that, but what I think you ought to do is learn to find your own, And
Right. That
so
experience, the process.
it's
It's
like,
not what you end up the end up product. It's a
and
process.
I think there's a danger sometimes in trying to over rationalize it, and so I think it's
Yes.
just like, but
Oh,
you
absolutely.
know when it's there, and
Sure.
it's like you just have to remember that feeling, and then whatever it takes every day to do that. If it's waking up and reading, or waking up and writing, or
Right.
um, sometimes it's meditation, sometimes it's exercise, whatever it is, it helps you get in the zone. That's what I call feeding your soul.
It's interesting when you say rationalizing, right?
Yeah.
Like you can rationalize yourself right out of anything,
Oh, sure. Right.
even though it's potentially positive for you and or unknown and mysterious. And yeah. So it's almost like the old thing, right? Well, just try it, do it.
That's generally what I tell my students at Miami when I teach design and graphics. It says, let's act first, think second. So because until you get it out there, put it out there to look at, you don't, you're always prejudging it, and that's the death knell of creativity, is to judge something before you've done it. It's like you're starting to put the pencil to the paper and you're thinking twice, and it's like, oh nope, don't want to do it because you think you got to do it perfect. It's like, well, it's not about that.
Right.
So I say, act and then think. So I have exercises
I
I
love
do.
that.
One of the exercises I like to do with new students, and it's been around for a long time in art classes and of all sorts, but it's called rapid drawing response. It's like, so I'll say, get out a big sheet of newsprint, and I'll say, put some dots on a paper, and 5 dots, and then I want you to think about, get a big black marker, put it on one dot, and so I want you to think you're pulling a string out and pulling it over to the other dot, and draw with your body, and then do that and sit point to point to point, for about 30 seconds. Before you know it, you're making without thinking, and then
Right.
we turn that around and we do. All right, let's look at some objects like a little still life. It's like, all right, put your pen on the paper and don't lift it up until I say so. All right, so it's a continuous line drawing. Just do this thing and then do profiles, do objects, whatever. Now we're going to do a ghost drawing where you do the same object over and over. Before you know it, they're making these fantastic drawings,
Right. And they
without thinking.
Right. They don't even realize what's happening at the time. They're
Right.
just kind of, like you said, doing. It's
Right.
it's amazing.
So it's a way to sort of get out of yourself and connect with the mind, the brain to the hand, and understand it as a kind of, I don't know, cathartic kind of. You sense it with your body,
Yes.
not
Yes.
just with your mind or your eyes. It's a whole body kind of making, which is the way I make art too. I want it to sense that people. I mean, that's where size and scale. But my work gets large sometimes because I want people to be able to get out of themselves and just sense it.
Yes.
It's the kind of like the eyes of the skin kind of thing.
Right. And
And,
I think it's almost like in terms of people trying to break down the mechanics of some kind of your any kind of project, and they can question themselves and not hesitate to actually, because you're thinking about a potential thing that's going to come out, but they don't know until they do it. Let me ask you, when you were in school, so you were drawing in church, your mom kept you busy there. When you went to school, did you go to school where'd you grow up? Where'd you grow up? And what school did you go to?
Schools, being an Air Force brat, anybody that's been in the military know that you move every 2 or 3 years. Until we settled down in Beaver Creek when I was finally in the 7th grade. My father got out of the Air Force and became a public school employee, driving school buses. And so until that time, we were mostly in schools on military bases, all through grade school, and then finally we got to Beaver Creek and went to junior high and high school at Beaver Creek High School. And,
Okay. Did you have any teachers you remember this podcast is all about mentors and
oh, sure,
right?
absolutely.
What's your strongest memory of being like somebody that was just there and you'll never forget them, or you have a story?
Well, I have two of my most memorable mentors. One was Coach Paul Martin. I was in football, wrestling, and track, and Uh, Mr. Martin passed away my senior year, and so. But I was connected to him and his family because one of my little side gigs in high school to make a little bit of money was doing portraits, and so I had done portraits of
There you
all of
go.
his children, and so I got to know the family a little more personally. And he was the one that taught me about intestinal fortitude. And so because that was his mantra as a coach,
Okay.
uh, about finding it in yourself. And so,
Right.
but the other person that probably most influential was a quiet woman, Miss Betty Vincent.
Miss Betty Vincent.
Yes, she looked like what we would call at that time a spinster. You know, just kind of gray hair,
Okay.
small, wiry woman who
Uh-huh.
wore simple. She dressed quite plainly, but she had a creative mind that she can that she understood me. And so while we're doing all the other things, it's like I always took art class, of course, and she had worked on a point system. And you know, this is one of those things like, well, if you get 100 points, you get an A. It's like, well, that wasn't, I didn't care about that. I mean, all I cared about was making. And so she would constantly give me other outside of class assignments. So by the time to the end of the period, I'd be like at 400 points. And so, because I'm doing all this other stuff just to kind of feed myself. And I don't know why, but she was, patient and instructive. And, you know, in high school, you think you're doing something fantastic, but in the larger scheme of things, looking back, it's fairly naive.
Right, right. You're keeping yourself out of trouble,
It's like
trying to learn
I
some
think this is the coolest thing. I mean,
some
I was
principles of life.
Yeah, well, I was really. I mean, I learned a lot of technique
Okay.
and a variety of
What did she teach? What was this? What was the
art.
subject?
Art.
Oh, she was the art teacher.
She was the art teacher
Oh,
at the high
nice.
school. Yeah,
Ah.
and so. Yeah, and I connected, so it was sort of funny because my group of friends who I'm still close to,
Yes.
I lived in two worlds. One was sports, and the other one was art.
Nice.
Most of my art friends were women, and all my sports friends were men.
Yes.
It was kind of one of those, but it obviously crosses over. But it's
Sure.
but it's but it was. I didn't think of it that way back then. I was just like, oh,
Well, just what it is.
this is just the worlds I live in, and so people would. I had this kind of bifurcated social experience.
That's nice.
In high school, and I would say I got my, fun on the. I would say, maybe work ethic for anything, if anything, on the sports field. But
I'm sorry. From what was his name? Coach? Was he a coach?
Coach Paul Martin? Yeah, there's the field's named after him. You know what I
Okay.
mean? So, and but anyway, so a long legacy history back then because
Nice.
Beaver Creek was, WL champions in wrestling and football and
Okay.
all those big things. So it's like for many years. So like any WL team. But
Okay.
But Miss Betty Vincent probably was probably the most enduring friend. I remember my wife and I, Sandy, who became high school sweethearts at the end of our high school years, and we're still married. Miss Betty Vincent came to our wedding and gave us this beautiful silver spoon, antique silver spoon, and it's like we still have that thing, and I think about her.
Really?
Yeah,
That's nice.
It's a serving spoon, but it's
Yeah.
it's like wow, this is so cool. So but no, yeah, she was probably if there was a high school influence, it was Miss Betty Vincent, who a lot of people had a tendency to kind of it's like because she didn't really look the part,
Yeah.
but she was absolutely brilliant, So,
Wow.
I mean, if you if you get into deeper discussions about stuff, she was spot on and always encouraging in a polite, quiet way. Not that I needed a lot of encouragement or whatever, because I was already on my path. She was just the one she's the one that let me do it.
Right. What I hear, it sounds like I bet you were really some really great juice for her in terms of right. It probably empowered her to I don't know, because you were obviously wanting to do what you wanted to do and more, and she had that the topic of art, and she's engaging you, and it sounds like you probably you probably were like an inspiration because it sounded like you really had a great relationship with her.
I didn't think of it that way, but but I suppose later in life it's like, yeah, I know what that's like as a teacher. And
Because how many kids go in, right, and like, oh, we're going to do some art, and they're like, well,
well, they always
whatever.
look at art as the easy subject, and I always looked at it as the hard subject. There's another nut I have to crack, that I have to figure this out.
A technique. What was your favorite medium initial? Is it
I
pencil?
was a painter, really.
Really?
Yeah, and I
Which kind of paint?
oil painting.
Oh, wow.
Back then, painting, drawing. Well, I did so many. I worked in.
Let me ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
When you did oil painting, did you from the beginning do sketches like pencil sketches and then paint, or do you go free form right to brush to a canvas?
I don't recall how I did it back then. It was probably more straight to the canvas, because that was, because that's the way the underlayments on the payment were the sketches, and it's a building up process. It was an additive building process, but as much as anything, to me, it was learning color. But I'd spent so much time doing black and white portraits, graphite.
That when you did those portraits of the kids, they was graphite.
Oh yeah, well, and
charcoal
lots
or
of
something?
people. Yeah. I did them for a long time, and it was a good lesson for me because when you're a painter, the number one lesson is values. That's just a technical thing.
Right.
Value, intensity, and hue, and it's like, but I also
monochromatic.
Yeah,
use of that monochromatic
absolutely.
scheme.
If you don't have that as a foundation, you'll be a terrible painter. So
Got it.
So
got
start
it.
with that. Even if you're a painter, say all painters know this.
That's what always make me nervous when I did the transition to doing painting.
Yeah.
And even color pastels, for that matter.
Yeah.
And the charcoal, like I had that control of the pencil. The charcoal wasn't as bad. Then all of a sudden you start throwing in the color, like you said, and I was almost like nervous when I'd get into doing painting, and so it wasn't till later in life that I really got into some acrylic painting. But let me ask you, so you seem to have an eye for detail, and also for like really freely expressing yourself freely. Have you always considered yourself creative and artistic from an early age?
I think so. I didn't reflect on it. I suppose. I should say maybe I, in a naive way, saw myself as an artist and wanting to make a living or make a world that way. But I was also, I came from a humble beginning. My parents didn't have an art background. My father, although he made a lot of furniture.
Well, that's a craftsman.
Oh yeah, he was a craftsman, but he didn't have outward expressive skills, as self-admitted. It's like it just wasn't his way of communicating. But so for me, I always wanted to be an artist, I think. But I actually began my educational career in college in fine art. But to be honest with you, I think I was not ready for it in a way. It was I would say artistically immature, and I was trying to find a path and struggling with it at Wright State for a couple of years, and then that's when I made the switch to architecture. It's like, okay, but you know what? What's interesting is all those art history and painting and all that stuff followed me into architecture. So what I found was, first I got 2 degrees at Sinclair, one in architectural technology and the other one in civil engineering. But by the time I made my way to UC a few years later in architecture, all that artistic knowledge came rushing back.
Oh, I bet it's like
So I always thought of architecture and painting as kind of brothers, and understanding the structure of and world and interpretation of art is gave me a really good handle on designing buildings.
Right, because when you can, obviously early when you weren't restricted to the ultimate reality of weight bearing and lines and whatever structure, right? And
Right.
then you go and like all of a sudden you jump into that detail, those those measurements that need for function, and then you have all that like either surface or ingrained knowledge of like that kind of historical architecture, the just the makeup, the forms. I'm sure
Well,
that was like either consciously or unconsciously just there for you when you supported your.
well, a lot of people would. I mean, I should say, unless you're in this world of architecture,
Yeah,
you
just
don't realize that.
you want to turn your head.
I'm sure
Yeah, yeah.
the naive outward layman's look at architecture and say, "Oh, that's pretty techie." You know what I mean? But the truth is that from an educational standpoint, it's much more art based. Architecture is one of the great liberal arts educations still left in the world, and design and the technology side of it unfolds gradually over time, but that's not the focus. The focus in any architectural school is the studio.
Right.
So the studio graphics, it's like, so out of all the courses that students take in college, more than half of them are in the studio with a focus. Those are where the biggest, largest amount of time is committed, and it becomes the focus of their life. So when you're on a campus and you know where the architecture buildings, that's the one building that's 24/7. The lights are always on, and students are there. I mean, obviously, during studio times, but it's like where you live in a way. It's where your family is built, family of friends, I should say.
Yes.
Not the only thing, of
And
course.
and a house of inspiration, probably, right? And
Yeah,
work.
well, it's
work area.
Yeah, the studio environment, the studio culture of being around everybody in a big place where everybody else is making.
Yes.
And
Everybody's kind of creating.
Everybody's making, so it's a pretty rich environment, inspiring. To kind of be in a room where there's all this creativity oozing out of the desk,
Right.
or out of the shop, or
I mean,
or
just
out of the galleries.
that environment can not help but just inform and inspire. The essence of a whole of all these right individuals.
And they
it's
get
awesome.
And they do get into some. I mean, the technology. What's interesting at Miami University. On Wednesday, we had the annual bridge walk. This is where the second year students have a structures assignment, and they work in small teams. And they have to design a bridge with a limited palette of wood with a maximum dimension size, and they're allowed to use cord and glue.
Mm-hmm.
No duct tape or anything weird like that. But they have to design a bridge to span 12 feet, and then they walk. It gets pounded up, and you walk across it, putting weight on it until it fails.
I just saw that was that just on the news, I think, I saw that somewhere in.
I might have posted it on my Facebook.
Yeah.
page.
That was great. That's great.
Yeah, the
Awesome.
students are doing that, and of course, they come up with team names and costumes, and it's a huge celebration on the intersection of art and
function
and technology,
community, right? Exactly.
So it's it becomes a rite of passage for them. So
because what is that's our like modern development and invention, that the more we modernize in its invention for function, community, and to obviously experience together as a community.
I think the highlight, it was funny that two of the professors that were teaching it, the moment that the students got the loudest and the most cheerful is when the professors themselves are walking across one of the bridges. It's the one bridge that didn't fail because it held up the two professors.
Like, let's get them across.
So they obviously look at their professors as mentors, and it was absolutely a moment of joy for the students.
We're not going to disappoint, and we're not going to take your kneecaps out. Nice.
But again, sometimes they won't remember. This is the kind of stuff from an educational mentoring standpoint that they're always going to remember.
Nice, nice. Now, where did you in your teens, in like your 20s? Where was your focus at? Where was your head at? I'm curious.
Wow. I think I was just trying to make a living about that point in time. In the teens, whatever, Sandy and I got married when we were 20.
Oh goodness. Okay.
And so we were.
You were
know,
high school sweethearts?
Oh yes, and so we both Sandy graduated from Sinclair and got a really great job that launched a fantastic career.
Nice.
For over 4 decades, and I was done everything from working in a pizza shop to things to sort of continue school, and and I remember
Hustling in the
eventually
process.
hustling, and worked for a contractor for a while, and I just eventually we made the decision that to go. I went to started my undergraduate my second after 4 years of college. I went back to UC to work on my undergraduate in architecture, and
Nice.
sold my car to pay for the first quarter of school, and we were
Getting it done.
and Sandy was working 2 jobs.
And what was her field of study? I'm sorry.
She was in the insurance world for the longest time, and so she began in a small agency and ended up eventually becoming vice president of her organization. And
Nice.
In the insurance world, so it's like things get bought and whatever, and she
Opportunities.
finished her adventure with in the insurance arm of Truist Bank. So it was
Okay.
but these things come and go. But she had a very rich and supportive career, and
Very
it's
nice.
like, so we grew together.
Nice.
I'm chaos. She's order. We have a great yin yang, and
We have so much in common.
she's like
Terry.
she's the blessing of my life. And it's
Okay.
like- and
That's
I
beautiful.
still like to joke that I'm on an annual renewal because
Oh.
I don't deserve her.
Don't forget to pay that subscription. So have you had any, Terry? Have you any really any significant life changing experiences like that steered your career path? Like when you were going to architecture school, you went back to UC. Is that University of Cincinnati? I imagine.
Yes.
Okay. And then once you were done there, did you have any experiences that like set you in, or what kind of opportunities came about when you were?
Well, that's interesting because after my undergraduate at UC it's technically, their program is a 6-year program that I wrapped up in 4 years, and I got out, got licensed as an architect, was working away, and one of my university professors gave me a call and said, "Terry, what are you doing?" And I was at that point in time while I was working, I had also been doing a project called 5 Players with 2 of my graduate friends lived in different parts of the country. We did this thing where it's a bit called Principle of the Third Man. It's like designing something so somebody can add on to it. So we did this round robin design thing around the idea of a dwelling. And that went on for a couple of years until we ended up with an art exhibition on it. And so I was working on that on the sidebar, but my professor called me, Bill Whittleson, who was the director of the graduate program, said, "Terry, what are you doing?" It's like, "Well, I'm doing this and that, and making good life." Says, "Well, listen, we've got this fellowship down here, and we'd like you to come back and do the graduate program and teach at the same time." And so I had a real privilege of doing that. Well, what's great about that is that there's no way in the world I could afford to go to graduate school. I just, I'm a poor guy, just, making a humble living, and Sandy's still working 2 jobs. Like, how can I do that? So, well, they gave me an opportunity. What's really great about it, even I didn't need it for licensure because I was already licensed. I didn't need it for professional advancement per se, but I needed it for the intellectual scratch. It's like there was an itch in there. There's something I hadn't figured out that I was able to do through graduate school, because the graduate program in architecture there was not a design program. It was history, theory, and philosophy. And so it's the study of those 3 things and
History and philosophy.
and theory.
And
Mostly
theory.
Lots of architectural theory, and so it's
Okay.
but you can't get into that without reading philosophy.
So would that be like an historical deep dive to kind of refer to like, historical structures that were built and then carry on that kind of styles of?
No, nothing
No?
stylistic. It wasn't about style at all.
Okay.
It was, if anything, it was really more about if I could summarize it, I would say is figuring out the connection between, how meaning in architecture occurs. How it's really about semiotics and semantics and semiotics, really, from language to understand, and also just philosophically understand how places become meaningful over time. And so, it really comes at the intersection of the physical world, the social milieu, and the cultural milieu. And so, that intersection of those three things is where architecture and meaning really happens. So it's not just about making things; it's about understanding the social context in which they occur, and how people think and behave, really, and then also the cultural connection with regard to the history and values of a place. And so it's really about placemaking. For me, was my real thesis there. It's about what's the difference between place and placelessness. And so
what is the difference between
well, you can sense when there's a real sense of place. The studio has a great sense of place, but there's also places that it's like, is this really a place or is this made up? Is that shopping mall really a place, or is it fabricated? Is it some places, for lack of a better term, become Disneyfied?
Okay.
It's like so what? So to me, it's about like I was describing before about the notion of a vest pocket utopia, and meaning in architecture only comes through experience. It's not meaning isn't inherent in the object. It's about the relationship between the human experience in that object. And what you can get out of it. So I'll give you a great example.
And so you're actually thinking about that when you're
making,
designing,
I do that now. That's what I teach as well. So I'll give you a great example that most people can relate to historically. Is the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C., created by a young graduate student, conceptualized this. She was Maya Lin was a graduate student at Harvard, and she had this really simple drawing that really appeared as it was a pastel on paper, simple drawing that appeared poetically as a gash in the earth. All right, and people who, in the world of war memorials, just thought like, well, that's really kind of, people didn't quite get it or understand it, and there was a revolt by a lot of folks who always thought of, as monuments, like the Lincoln Memorial, as being like, oh, it's going to be up on a pedestal, it's going to do something, and we need, the Vietnam War was tragic in a lot of ways, over 50,000 deaths, and politically fraught with a lot of things, and still relatively fresh in the American memory.
Right.
In good and within the veterans world, it's like, hey, we're brothers and sisters,
right?
But in the popular culture, huge anti-war movements and
right. That was the first time that we had such a upheaval of that kind of patriotism.
And how are we going to create a memorial around that? Well, so what's interesting about it is divided as that eventually unfolded. It still happened regardless of what people thought about it, and so it was really I would say kind of a tortured experience to bring that into the American landscape. But now, anybody that goes there, if you've been there, and I've been there a number of times, you go there and you experience that as you walk along that wall.
Yes.
And you're become, at first it's at zero, and then you, all of a sudden it's, 20 feet high and over your head, and you're enveloped in this, because the tallest part happens at the peak of the war, and the maximum deaths that are on those names, and it's like you can't be in a place like that. And so now that memorial is so much a part of the American consciousness and our DNA as an honored, sacred place. You can't imagine that not being there. And so this is what's interesting, is that over the course of time is how the meaning of that memorial changed. And so from something that was doubtful to something that is now part of our DNA.
I'd seen just here locally, not maybe like last year or so, they did they brought in like a portable little representation of the actual Vietnam Memorial.
Yeah.
And then, now that you say that, it's like almost in the conscious of American wars, like as it went from low to sloping high, 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 and it was almost like a
And
feverish pitch of emotion and cultural awareness of like, and then we had this unrest. We saw it in the '60s where
Yeah,
they're going
right.
crazy. Before that was all patriotic, rah rah rah.
right.
And yeah, that's fascinating.
And of course, it was, I mean, even in its materiality, black granite, you know what I mean?
Right.
As opposed to white marble, and it's like, and it's like, and so, and now there's, I mean, they've got warehouses full of artifacts that have been collected that have been left at the memorial. And so, and they all get cataloged through,
Right.
The Smithsonian, and it's
Some
like,
just left and they don't know really where it came from.
oh, they
or
know,
people.
but there's always, I mean, because people will put things in, they'll put things at the base of the wall, they'll put it in the crevice, or they'll
Yes.
do things. I mean, obviously things like organic matter, like flowers, don't last, but
Right.
But there were also other memorabilia from the lived experience with those the carved name isn't just a carved name; it's a person.
Right.
It's a life lived and a life lost. So when people make those connections, that's why it's so important to see memorials in this way, as that's effective to not just remember. How do I say this? It's what brings us hope. I think it's like, this is like, I believe in the them giving their life, that it gave me life.
Right, gave you the free will, the continue free will.
Yeah. So
what I relate to that is when I was about 21, my sister married a Frenchman, and I went to France at 21, and we ended up going to Normandy, and we went to the hills on the beach side, whatever, where all the white crosses.
Yeah.
And it just unbelievable. You look across and it's a sea of rolling hills and white crosses.
Yeah.
And it's just just in all white. And then as you mentioned, the fact that it's such a honorable memorial of that honored unified spirit, and then all of a sudden you have this representation of the Vietnam sloping dark granite that there's still seems like there's still discussions that need to be had or to address as like we realize how the horrors of war, and realize over time in terms of conscious awareness as kind of human beings, like how much of this can we continue to do that's just and fair and right and worthwhile in the senselessness of it.
And what's really important, I think, is to recognize and acknowledge. I'm not a veteran, you know what I mean?
Right.
And it's not my story, but it's their story. But you know what? This is a story it's been told many, many times, but it's something that you hope gets told enough times that it's never forgotten.
Exactly.
And I'm sure, I don't know if you have any veterans listening, but my heart is with them, and I have my father, my mother, and my brother are all both buried at the VA here, and so I honor their service in that way, and can never pretend to fully know their experiences.
Right.
But there's a hope that I can find some empathy in there.
It's a great message.
So that it lives on, So that's, memorials are tough subjects. But before I get in there, I wanted to admit, you asked the question about turning moments, and so graduate school certainly helped me to find a structure for me to organize my thinking about the world of design and making and placemaking. And I learned a lot of important things that I still carry today. And I, after leaving the university and teaching a bit, whatever, I opened my own office. And at the same time, I opened my own little art gallery as a part of my office down in the Oregon district. And I thought this is what I call my gift to the street, And so I wanted to create a place where communities could come together and there's a lot of stories around that and supporting local artists. And
Nice.
I saw myself as in that, even though found my own creativity in architecture at that point in time, but I was still, drawing and painting, sketching, doing things, personally, but not sharing it so much.
Okay.
I thought it was more important for me to help coach and elevate others at that point in time.
Right.
And after,
That's awesome.
yeah, and then around 2000, I was in a transition there with my practice, some.
Now let me ask you. You can get back to your transition of your practice. Sure. Oregon District, the street right there, like that strip.
Yeah.
Were you where were you in terms of like east, west, and north, south? What side of the street were you on?
I was on Brown Street on the north side, right across the street from the Oregon Express.
Got it.
Had a little, I had some friends that went along there. There was a variety of things that went in and out, and a little business that did embroidery, and eventually. Tracy McElfresh and her friend Jess had a little business there for a while, and the radio station was upstairs, and it was.
Which radio station?
Oh, I can't remember.
You remember?
I can't remember. It was one of those. Back then it was I can't remember exactly what it was. It was it was actually several FM stations.
Okay.
Rock, country, all that stuff. But anyway, and so it was a kind of a interesting, fabric of people and restaurants and.
Okay.
Ned Pepper's was just being built down the street.
Oh, got it.
Back in those days, and remember Jim was always a renegade, and
Who's Jim?
He was the owner.
Peppers.
Yeah, Ned Pepper's. Yeah,
Okay.
back in those days. But anyway, so it was and Sam Sterling at the jewelry store down the way. But just and. Little art stores popped, galleries popped up. So I sort of saw myself. This is why litmus tests.
That transition period
was to see how that neighborhood was changing over at that point. And I always sort of, back then, you could see, look in the go section of the Dayton Daily News and say, well, how many openings are there this week? And you could count them. It's like, so I got to see. That was my way of measuring. The strength of the art community.
Oh, there you go.
Back then, and including my own stuff.
You're talking about the early 2000s?
No, late 90s.
Late 90s,
late
okay.
Late 90s, and I always made a deal out of every single exhibition I did. We got press from, locally or statewide, and always was very conscious of that. And I spent a ton of money on postcards. And
were you put? So you did you have a space and you were putting on events?
It was the Archetype Gallery and
Archetype Gallery.
Yeah, right. Back in
those
days.
What years did that run?
That went from
that?
like 94 to 2000.
Oh, nice.
And it was we started doing things with gathering, and so what we figured out, working with what was then the Dayton Visual Arts Center, now the Contemporary those days, we shared some mailing list, and we said, well, we're not going to step on each other's toes. And what we found out was that in the art community, what really people like to do is to have multiple openings on the same night.
Oh, so they can just down the Oregon District there?
Oregon District and downtown and just whatever. So it's like, I can go here, I can go there.
Walk through, yes.
They make a whole evening out of going to different galleries.
Absolutely.
And so that was sort of like an accident that that turned into a positive thing.
A good problem.
Yeah,
right.
It's like,
an opportunity.
Because otherwise, you say, well, don't have an opening at the same time we are.
Right.
It's like, well, actually, that's a bad idea. What's good is
spread the love.
Is that we do that because people really socially enjoy, connecting in both places. So that was sort of a really fun period, and I got to really, because I was sponsoring so many different artists back then.
Mm-hmm.
I became really connected. Well, when I finally closed that, I went to the city of Kettering. It was a switch for me, selling my business and going into public service. But I always saw myself as a servant in a way.
Okay.
And so for me to go into public service was a natural move for me. My biggest fear, and this is really worth knowing for people, my biggest fear is that going into public service, because it was a very left brain kind of thing, getting additional certifications and a lot of technical things, because all of a sudden I'm supposed to know more than everybody else about construction and safety of buildings and approve whatever else everybody does, because my signature went on every single a plan approval, a permit, as people would call it. It's like, it had to, me and my staff had to, sort of do that. And that's been around, been around for a long time, but I still took it as something. But my biggest fear in that as a creative person was that my brain would shrivel up to the size of a walnut because of the job.
The creative side of your brain?
Yes.
Okay.
And so, but here's what I found out.
So you made a conscious decision to try to kind of like negate that potential?
It wasn't conscious, but it's certainly what I found out by experience was that it's not the job that makes the brain, it's the brain that makes the job. And so I took all that creative energy and poured it into the notion of being a public servant and an attitude about it that says, when you come to work in the morning, we're servants, and you check your ego at the door. This is not about us, it's about serving the public, and my staff embraced that for the entire duration I was there. And also, part of it's a rah-rah teamwork thing, but it's also supporting each other.
Right.
People have fun, look at public servants, it's like, oh, they're just, just deadbeat bureaucrats. It's like, no.
No, yeah,
our attitude was like, our goal is to get people to yes, and help them achieve, I always looked at the building department as an arm of economic development. And so you got contractors and owners, and everybody is trying to, and they have to navigate me. All right. So
right.
It's like, or the building system, and it's like, how do we get people there? Because you've got owners who are trying to run a business, and they're
trying to ensure a productive flow of interest and productivity.
Right. Yeah. It's like, so you have to sort of be able to, what's interesting is coming from the private sector into the public sector gave me some insight into that I really appreciated.
Okay.
But the real thing personally for me is that, by coincidence at that point in time, two art friends of mine, we would have lunch every Thursday. We called it Art Lunch, and it still exists today as an event at Rosewood and other Rosewood, Dayton Society artists, Dayton artists. So it's a rotating lunch. It happens every Thursday at noon. And it's got to show up, and it's artists who just come up. Well, we all love art. We all got something going on.
Yes.
We have to little lunch, show and tell, meet with your friends, and
Fun.
But we all have to eat. We all love art, so let's get together and do it. So
exactly.
That happens every Thursday. Well, Don Williams and Ron Hunt started that.
Okay.
At the City of Kettering, and this was just kind of our thing. We started inviting friends. It's like, hey, why don't you join us for lunch, whatever, and but they invited me to collaborate with them on an installation at the Dayton Art Institute called City of Seven.
Okay.
It was a installation in the Experience Center for children.
What year was that?
That was in 2000 and started in 2003, 2004.
Okay.
And so this is when I ran into one of those inspirational moments. I was collaborating with them. I had this thing in my mind about sticks and scaffolding and this kind of complex woven thing. But I remember during that time period, I was in Washington at the National Gallery and walked into this big Calder room and seeing the work of Calder, and those sculptures, those mobiles.
Okay.
And I felt like Saul on the road to Damascus. And it's like, oh my goodness, I've got to figure this out.
Do you feel like it was like an aha moment of like, like a moment of inspiration, obviously?
It was, but it was, again, it was like sort of an enlightening moment. I'm going like, I should say a challenging, but enlightening. It's like I need to investigate this because I found a connection to myself in a way.
Right.
I'd always been sort of in the painting, wood sculpture, kind of earthy thing, but this kind of thing about suspended art and kinetic art and everything, it's like once first of all, there are plenty of books on Calder, but nothing about how to make a mobile. So I had to learn by trial and error.
Nice. There's the grand adventure of the artist. Now, when I'm hearing you as from that young boy drawing portraits to getting into architecture to being a public servant, that kind of trifecta, being inspired by obviously your fellow artists around
Yeah.
you, and need and public and what goes on and what can click. So, when you went to a transition between like that artistic studio mindset in the architectural world, now the public servant world, when did you, and you were talking about these mobiles, like,
Yes.
okay. And that's what I'd seen one of your installations, and I was like, oh, that's fascinating. And it's really great, interesting to hear that you were you just jumped into that. Now, did you have anybody that, was it completely on your own? Did you have any direct contact with somebody that had some experience doing that kind of stuff?
I eventually ran into some people,
Large stuff like that?
but that was much later. And so what's interesting is that I had done some small. For that, I made 7 mobiles that were, I used repurposed steel wire from signs. Very strong tensile steel. I love hanging out in a hardware store, and so it's like, well, what can I do with that? And so I found sheet aluminum and pop rivets I designed my own way of fabricating joints, hooks and loops, and figured out a sliding balance system so I could make these things move the way I wanted.
Would you do things at like minute scale and then just scale it up?
No,
How would you?
Sometimes I do experiments, so it has to take some do-overs. But
right.
Eventually, that's the nature of making mobiles. Sometimes there's a secret to it, and I share the secret. It's like, if you're going to make a mobile, you start at the bottom, not the top, okay? And so
gravity.
Gravity. Well, think about
the base of the operation.
Think about balancing a spoon or a fork on your finger, all right? And
right.
Now I move up from there. So how
yes.
do I do it? So, but nevertheless, this sort of trial and error. That's really what it is. It's a lot of trial and error. Sometimes I usually end up with as much stuff on the floor as I do in the air, because it's
right.
so it's that kind of a process, and I love bending and folding. It's a very handsy kind of thing.
And so in terms of your mobiles,
yes,
designs, what has been your go-to favorite medium or type of steel or whatever material that you use these days?
Well, probably the most common thing I use is welding steel. I use a welding rod. It comes in a variety of gauges and whatever, and it's usually about 3 feet long. So we're making smaller things. So that's sort of the most common handsy thing. And early on I was painting a lot of aluminum, which was really time consuming and complicated. Then I discovered a company that makes really beautiful small sheets of colored anodized aluminum. It's much more expensive, but a real time saver and more permanent. And so, but that was early on, and I was doing these mobiles, and so eventually, I remember John Emery was working with the city of Vandalia and the Rotary Club up there to do a piece of public art, one of the first public pieces.
John Emery, is he also a local artist?
He's a local artist, yes. Right,
okay.
Yeah.
Is he still here in Dayton?
Off and on. He lives in New Zealand now.
Shout out to John Emery.
Yeah,
New Zealand.
Famous watercolor artist. But anyway, John and I had been friends, and he said, Terry, I want you to apply for this public piece. And I was like, really, me? Okay. Well, I thought I was in the art world, that I would just try to make some things and maybe somebody will buy it. It was kind of naive in a way, but it's like, that's kind of the way I thought it worked. It was a very naive look, because oftentimes the way galleries work, and
you're just doing it.
Right. And so, lucky me, I got this commission to do this large scale piece at the Rec Center in Vandalia, and it was a piece called Icarus, after the Greek mythology of flying to the sun. I made these big giant birds, and they were kind of real techie looking, because I was relating to the notion of flight and
Dayton,
and so there's kind of these weaving stories through it, and so that was my large public piece.
Which in your career to date, what is your largest project, and what is been the most the other kind of on the smaller scale?
Well, I've done dozens and dozens of small private commissions and small things. I do a lot of experiments and stuff that end up, finding their way out of the studio to somebody's place. And but the largest piece that most people are familiar with is the Fractal Rain at the Dayton Public Library.
Fractal Rain.
Yes, this is a piece that when you walk into the main public, this was again another competitive process. Well, and a lot of public art is that it's competitive, and so you make a proposal, and
Right.
and then you maybe get shortlisted. And,
Let me ask you,
yeah,
that library, when did it go up?
it was completed in 2017.
And is that where my old high school was?
No,
Is that the library there? That's not the same
no,
building?
this is what
I was at John H. Patterson.
No,
Near
no,
Memorial Hall.
No,
That's
it's near there. Near there. I
What's
mean,
the building across from Memorial Hall? It's
I know what you mean. You're talking about those care sources down there.
is it Care Source?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, my bad.
But the main public library downtown,
Yes.
which is on the site of what was the library that was built in the 50s.
What's that street?
That's at Third and Patterson.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, so they did.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So they took the original library. They
yeah.
took the bones of the library and expanded it, basically doubled it, and then also you walk in. There's a giant 3-story atrium space.
Okay.
With a giant, huge, long skylight, and the building has a funny angle bend to it that relates to the geometry of the city and the river.
It's funny because I was just having this conversation with my girlfriend about how she mentioned her sister was in Florida. She'd go to the library to do some studying. Mm-hmm. And it was, and I was like, the library. And it's like, it's such a great, quiet public space. And I telling her this, I need to go down there and see it because I moved away in 1984 and I came back 34 years later. Right. And, the city is just like, it's just like another world to me, complete another world. Well, but let me ask you, so when you're, what do you call it?
Fractal Rain? Oh, no.
That Fractal Rain, this is at the Dayton Library?
Yes.
Okay. And so
they had
did you, so you won that, did you have to bid on it or something?
No, it's not a bid. I mean, it is pricing involved, but it's they had a...
Somebody found you.
Well, you had to propose an idea. In that process, they had a process called Reimagining Works, where they took people from that neighborhood or whatever, and they worked with the library staff and the Dayton Art Institute to identify 3 pieces of work at the Art Institute to be as a launching inspiration. And in this case, they had 3 works that they wanted artists to respond to for all the work in the library. One was this very contemporary conceptual piece by New York artist Namjoon Paik. There's a stack of televisions. It's kind of a mixed multimedia thing. The other one was a gold Chimu mummy mask, which had all these kind of little sort of triangular fractal things on it. And the other one was Monet's Water Lilies, which it's the one Monet that the Art Institute owns, and it's occasionally on loan other places, not unusual. But those were the 3 pieces we react to. So at the point, the artistic process isn't to emulate one of those things, they just use it as a launching point. And so I thought I'd been making rain sculptures, and so this was like an expansion, but never one this big. I'd done some large installations, some temporary installations. I did one in Tiffin. I did installed, some permanent pieces in Cleveland, and those were pieces where there's thousands of wire and Swarovski crystals and those things. And so, but this time I had to scale it up. It was a really long experimental creative process, but that piece ended up being 120 feet wide. It's 36 feet tall and a 3-story atrium space, and it sits in the slice of space of the stairs, the grand stairs that wind from the first floor all the way up to the 3rd floor. And so it's one of those sort of experiential things that as you walk up the stairs, you're walking alongside it, you pass under it, you walk again, and you ascend with it. And then it's got 5 miles of high-strength stainless steel wire that was custom fabricated I went to the wire manufacturer in Illinois. I went to another company to help me with all the bending, because it's got like 11,000 bends in it, so I had to do some industrial processes.
How long did that take you to do that project?
A couple years, and
full time.
Well, not full time, but but off and on, working, I was doing other projects at the same time, and then I found to get the wire to be the glisten the way it is, it had to go to an electrolytic process at a place that had big enough tanks in Wisconsin. Okay. And then I did all the final fabrication in the studio with my studio assistant, Jenny Montgomery, who teaches at the STEM school, and my son, Chris.
So there's a lot of bodies involved,
yeah,
right?
A lot
to
of people moving.
Get it done.
And fabrication, I used another company. What I found is that the glass was too heavy for the prisms. So it's got 3,756 acrylic prisms in them. Each one's about 6 inches long.
Oh, my goodness.
And
wow.
And another scientific process, I discovered that I wanted some of them to have color. So 600 of them have color in them in a really subtle way, using a chemical process in the studio. So I found a company that makes chemicals for dyeing sunglasses, okay? And I have to use some admixtures, and so I have Monet's palette of lavender, pink, green, yellow. And so as you walk up through this, you'll start saying, hey, there's some color here, but they all come from Monet's palette. And all of these, of course, have to be UV resistant over multiple years.
Right,
and
all those details.
And the details of how the prisms get attached to, each one of them actually gets heat welded to the end of these things. So what you really see there, because this rain sculpture, it's not just wires hanging vertically. They actually slope at a variety of a half a dozen slight angles, the way rain moves on like a storm.
Yes.
And so what you really have there is an assemblage of overlapping 350 mobiles.
Whoa.
All in one space. So it's like a complicated process to put them together, to nest them all, to get them in there. And I had a whole team of people to get 60 feet in the air on a 2-man lift to assemble all this stuff. I had to work with structural engineers to design the cables that go between the beams to suspend it and disappear, And so it's a really elaborate process.
Quite the installation.
So there's this thing between art and science and not being afraid to be in the industrial world of fabrication.
Well, a necessity at that point.
And so when you go in there, what I really, I tell you this wonderful story about meaning and art. It's like, so how I said it's not inherent in the piece? I might give it a name. And, and I look at rain as part of the inspiration of Dayton's DNA from our flood history. If you live in Dayton, the flood's a part of our DNA. It's just who we are. We know about the 1913 flood. Everybody can tell the story. And so the rain has this kind of love-hate thing with us, So I wanted to relate to that flood history as well as this artwork and create a kinesthetic experience for people. So in this case, rather than the mobiles moving, it's the body moving and seeing the light change as you move around it. And so it's all of a sudden it's like you're
almost taking in.
So what happens is
it's based on your experience. Each individual is going to have their own unique experience as they.
And this came out of a childhood experience of being in Nebraska. Well, my father was in the Air Force, living at Offutt Air Force Base. Back in those days, as kids, we had run of the place. Outside. We never stayed inside. Where it's always outside in the summertime. You're bored, you got to do something. We get in all kinds of mischief. But one of the things that was cool to do, if you've never done this, you should do it even as an adult, is go stand in a rainstorm. Just get soaked and put your arms out and you feel the sting of the rain on your arms.
Yes.
That to me is a wonderful memory. Of course, in Nebraska, we get these big thunderheads that come across.
Sure.
It's like, it's raining, and then downpour, and you're getting soaked. And that sense of stinging rain on my arms is what I wanted to visually create in this thing. That's where I came from, all right?
Yes.
And so what's interesting, I remember on the day that it opened, I think it was Judge Mers with his wife and his grandson. It's like, Terry, I hope you don't mind, but our son didn't quite see it our grandson didn't see it. So I said, what'd you see? He looked up at this giant sculpture. Instead of saying rain, he sees a dinosaur. I said, perfect. Perfect.
It worked.
So what happens is, and the best thing about art, the best art in my team is not a one-liner. The best art is multivalent, where people can bring their own life story to it. And get their own meaning. That's how meaning occurs.
Right.
It's between you and
each individual experience
and the work that you bring to it to say, this is what it feels like and means to me.
Exactly.
And that's how meaning occurs.
So Terry, let me jump over to this. You're an educator, right?
Yeah.
How does being an educator compare to, say, working on a project involving city planners and builders? I mean, have you made any unique discoveries in the process of now being an educator as opposed to this organized civil service job?
Well, even in my civil service job, I did a lot of teaching to the American Institute of Architects, because what I saw in that job, don't just look at how I do work, but I got to see how everybody else worked. Mm-hmm. Every single firm, contractors, the business world, I got another view of them about how they approach the world, and I found some gaps. So I found myself in a teaching mode quite often with the American Institute of Architects. It says, let me teach them about how to use the law, the building codes, technology as a way forward, and help them be. My objective in that case is to help them be heroes to their clients. And so you can bring knowledge and wisdom to the process.
Kind of inform the process, inform people.
So it was a regular thing for me for over 20 years to help people in that role, and whether it was public speaking to community groups or whatever. So that was the thing. It was the teaching thing.
Right. So you were literally doing what's obviously necessary in all the time, but they point this out, educators in the 21st century, is that you were simultaneously problem solving, critical thinking,
yes,
communicating, and allowing that collaboration to occur, and all those things taking place in terms of those 3 C's.
Well, I mean, what's interesting is that while all that was going on, my public appearance was really more in the art world. I mean, that's how more people know me through the art world than through
right. Stand out.
I mean, the professional side, working with architects and engineers and contractors, but because I was launching my own public art world and doing sculptures and growing, and what I found out is I can make an honest living through public art, because there's a lot more money in it.
Okay.
I mean, it's much more difficult and competitive in certain ways, but it's more business oriented in a way, because in public art I can make a small sculpture and sell it for $500 or $1,000, or I can do one project for $50,000.
Right.
So it's like, okay, how do I want to do? And there's a different path for everybody with regard to how they, who they work with and acquire work through. But the commission work was gave me longer timelines to work with. So while I was, working as a servant, I could also do nights and weekends and vacation time to travel and make big art. So those two things kind of overlapped. But what was interesting, I got to this sense in the public art world about collaboration, and my most recent project being the Memorial Project.
Okay, and that's what I want to get to. I want to talk about the Oregon District Memorial. Sure. And I just found this. I'm going to go ahead and here we go. I'm going to slide this over.
Sure.
And I, again, coming to understand, is this a nice shot of it?
Yeah, that's the sculpture part of it. That's when we were installing the sculpture.
Right.
That was just one piece of it. The larger event is actually, so that's this of course sits in front. It sits behind a wall, the thing called the Unity Bench, which is a 40-foot wide bench.
Okay.
And the big thing is the plaza in front of it. This is where we marshaled, through Jess McMillan and the Mosaic Institute, 5,000 volunteers to participate in the construction of this giant mosaic that took over 6 months of volunteerism and all those hands in multiple places.
All that community, just that collaborative.
This was the opportunity for the community. When after that shooting, people were saying, do something. Well, here's the way that 5,000 people got to do something. They got to be a part of the healing process.
Yes, it's wonderful.
To make this giant mosaic and participate in the process. And so at the end, it wasn't just 4 artists; it was 4 artists and 10,000 hands.
No, nice. See,
And
that's
so that's the
interesting.
way.
I didn't know
So
that.
so there was a kind of a. I mean, so it's not just about the object in the end; it's about the process.
Right.
It's like because we knew we needed not just a place in the end, but we also needed a process that allowed the community to participate and be a part of that. So when people come together to put the mosaics together, they might be writing the name of a loved one that they lost on the back of that tile. Or they might
Right.
be doing,
Oh.
and so it's just realizing it's like, you know what, I'm connecting back because, after a tragic event like that, you have to figure out how am I going to not let somebody rob me of my humanity?
Right.
And this is the way we do it.
Such a collective, collaborative, community-based
Absolutely.
project, which is like it just.
And so
I mean,
now,
that was like that's just a brilliant idea in terms of right.
well, there was again a competitive process. They did a national search. We competed against I don't know 40 different teams,
Really?
and I put together what I call the dream team
Okay.
regionally because all of us are well known as artists. As myself, James Pate, African American artist, that's been around for a long time. Former Governor's Award winner. Jess McMillan, probably the what I would call the best mosaicist in the state, who's right here in Dayton with the Mosaic Institute, nonprofit organization, doing quite well. Jess and I have been friends for years, and then Sierra Leone, I would consider her Dayton's poet laureate. Has done public work, and you see her work like at places like the Levitt Pavilion and
Love
other
it.
places
Love
around
it.
town. And she and I collaborated on a project years ago that I created called the You Are Here Project.
Okay.
And this was, again, think about mentoring. It's like, the You Are Here Project in 2012 where we did these giant projections on the face of the courthouse. We had
Oh.
a giant balloon, the arrow pointing down, that ubiquitous arrow you see on maps that say You Are Here.
Yes.
The point being is that as individuals and as communities, we have to look inward for our values. I mean, it's a terrible thing for a mid-sized city like Dayton to try and compare ourselves to to Cincinnati, Columbus, or any other
Okay.
city, because we become who we are as a city based on our internal values and who we are.
Right.
And that's the way I want cities to look at themselves, is to find your inner value system, the things that make you who you are, and that's how we should live. You can do that as an individual, you can do that as a neighborhood, and you can do that as a city.
Wonderful.
And we can do it as a country as well. So it's like
That's-
that's what those value systems are so core to that. And so when you're trying to figure out the self-discovery, the thing you got to quit doing is quit measuring yourself by other people.
Right.
And so this is
Well, there you go. The artistic expression, that confidence, and just know that just kind of like just do it. I hate to put that.
yeah.
Just do it.
Well, and we found this really cool sacred geometry that we could adopt and make our own. It's called the Seed of Life. That's the name of the book. So that, the memorial was the 8-4 memorial, but it's now known as the Seed of Life Memorial down in the Oregon District, right next to the trolley stop. And here's the cool thing: all the lessons that I learned about placemaking are now coming back because it has a connection to the street. The typical approach to something like this is like, well, make an object and put it in the middle of the space.
Right.
Wrong move. We decided that we were going to make a place that people could gather and connect. Obviously you can see the sculpture there that sits and resides and oversees the space, sitting back behind the giant Unity bench.
Oh.
And we had a great time. We worked with the STEM school and some other schools. The STEM school helped us to build these precast concrete caps with the ginkgo tree symbols, ginkgo leaves, and the Sankofa bird, which is a famous East African symbol that were used throughout. And obviously the poetry of Sierra Leone woven throughout
Wonderful.
this project. And, the
A lot of
James
thought and time, love, community,
well,
input, and just
And so what's interesting about the process, and this is worth knowing on any collaborative project, it takes a lot of trust. And
Right.
the four of us, you can take 4 strong artists, okay? It's like, well, this could be a time to butt heads, right?
Yeah.
No. So what everybody has to do is give up a little bit of power and say,
Sure.
All right, when we make decisions, we make them together, and everybody has veto power. You know, it's like, all right, so we have to build consensus, and we have to sort of move in the right direction, trust each other, and make sure to include each other. So instead of saying, okay, Jess, you design this, and Jess or James, you design that, Sarah, you write that, and Terry, you know, do something else and manage the process, and it's like, nah, that's not good. So all of us collaborated on
Just
all the
everything,
elements.
just constantly.
Yeah, so it's constant sharing, and maybe, you know, obviously Jess would be leading the mosaic side with her, you know, knowledge and experience of doing giant mosaics. And James and I from a graphic standpoint, and me as an architect and a sculptor and understanding
Right.
uh,
All those little
manufacturing
nuggets, all those little
processes.
nuggets of ideas and inspiration, and kind of
Well, and, you
to
know,
create
and I
this
said
ultimate
working with,
continuity.
yeah, Buddy Sheet Metal is our primary fabricator for all the steel, and the structure underneath the bench, and the fabricating the steel sculpture, and all the steel rings that are in the ground, you know. So having trusted friends in the fabrication world,
Yeah.
that just, it's like, okay, this is a real team project. I mean, and there's always something going wrong. Every day there's a crisis. You know what I
Sure.
mean? It's like, okay.
What, Terry? What advice would you give someone, you know, considering, you know, a young person considering in the, you know, the field of architecture, say, particularly, you know, because obviously, you know, it takes a level of creativity and obviously structure and methodology. What is your biggest advice? We'd say, like, I would say, I'll frame this as, you know, artist slash your architect, your experience. What's the most important thing, you know, broad kind of spectrum thing that young people should realize and
Here's the thing that they need to discover. I'll make a famous quote here, from television movies. That is to figure out what you love to do and spend the rest of your life getting good at it.
hey,
It's
it's
so, you know,
pretty straightforward to me.
it's like, so understanding, so this is where reflecting on, like, what really floats my boat, what gets
Right.
me up in the morning. And I have this conversations with students now. It's like, you know, why are you doing this? You know, because mom and dad said to, because this is where your heart is. Why this? I mean, most of them have figured out, like, I know they're touching on something, they're still kind of sorting it out. But even in the field of architecture, it's wide, very wide spectrums. There are some kids that might go into doing a minor in gaming, or they might be doing a, you know, a minor in world history or some other thing. So that they can, so many paths you can take, you know, in the world of architecture and in art too. So if you're a painter, it's like, you know, and this is something you have to say, this is what gets me up, and I'm gonna live and breathe this, and I'm gonna make this. And it's but you also have to figure out a way, you know, sometimes it's like in some of these professions, you have to have a side gig for a while.
Thank you so much, Terry Welker,
Thank
for
you.
spending time with us today on Imagine Fitting In. All right, kids. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Professor